Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight's video, Zerubbabel, is the first of a series of 3 looking at the stories of the principals in the Royal Arch chapter. It's once again taken from the excellent History of Royal Arch Masonry by Everett R. Turnbull and Ray V. Denslow. I hope you enjoy it. Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore. Zerubbabel, as we know, was the son of Shealtiel, and the grandson of King Jehoiakim, king of Judah, who in the year 597 BC, after a reign of less than 4 months, was carried into Babylonian captivity with 10,000 of his subjects by Nebuchadnezzar, one of the greatest monarchs of the ancient world. The Hebrew signification of the name Zerubbabel is given as begotten in Babylon. Companion Laxton Sweet, a past principal of the author's chapter, said of Zerubbabel, "Born, no doubt, in the stirring and exciting times when the exploits and conquests of Cyrus and the Persians astounded the then known world, he was, as a youth, caught up in the enthusiasm of that small band of his people who believed that Cyrus was the Messiah, destined at Jehovah's instigation to deliver them and their race from the Babylonian yoke." Cyrus, who had been referred to as God's shepherd by Isaiah, had become imbued with the knowledge of true religion as a result of the prophecies of Isaiah and his conversations with the prophet Daniel and other Jewish captives of learning and piety. Accordingly, says Josephus, an earnest desire and ambition seized upon him to fulfill the prophecy concerning him. So he called for the most eminent Jews that were in Babylon, and told them that he gave them leave to go back to their own country and to rebuild the city of Jerusalem and the temple of God. He then, in the year 538 BC, issued the royal edict that constituted the starting point of the tradition of the Holy Royal Arch. This can be found in Ezra chapter 1, verse 1. And so, in the following year, we find a brave band of Jewish pioneers undertaking the arduous adventure of returning to Jerusalem under the leadership of Sheshbazzar or Shenenbazzar. It may be that Sheshbazzar was either the Babylonian or Persian name of Zerubbabel. In the epistle sent by Cyrus to the Syrian governors, in which he informed them of the permission he had given to the Jews, he said, "I have sent my treasure and Zerubbabel, the governor of the Jews, that they may lay the foundations of the temple." In the 2nd chapter of Ezra, verse 2, it is stated that Zerubbabel, with others, went up out of the captivity, and in the next chapter we read, "When the 7th month was come, then stood up Jeshua and his brethren, and the priests, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and his brethren, and builded the altar of the God of Israel." And later we also read, "In the 2nd year of their coming into Jerusalem, namely the year 535 BC, they set forward the work of the house of the Lord." Objection to the work was then taken by a number of adversaries, who persuaded the successor of Cyrus to countermand the royal edict, and the work ceased for about 15 years, until the 2nd year in the reign of Darius, king of Persia. In the meantime, Zerubbabel, who was an old friend of Darius, had evidently returned to Babylon and had become a member of the king's bodyguard. It was then that the interesting story about Zerubbabel given in Esdras originated, a story which has been dramatized in one of the Allied degrees. In the 3rd and 4th chapters of the 1st book of Esdras, is given the vivid narrative of the unique contest of wits in which Zerubbabel triumphed, and, by thus gaining the king's favour, attained to a position of influence which enabled him to get permission to return to Jerusalem and resume the work of rebuilding the temple and the holy city. Briefly, King Darius had to retire to bed after a great feast, and 3 officers of his bodyguard agreed together upon a contest of wits. The account given in Esdras states that each of them was to speak a sentence, write it down, seal it, and place the written sentence under the king's pillow. When the king rose from his slumbers, the sentences were handed to him, and it was arranged that the king and his court should decide which of them had said the wisest thing, and the winner was to be rewarded with the most signal marks of royal favour. The first wrote, "Wine is the stronger." The second wrote, "The king is strongest." And the third, who was Zerubbabel, wrote, "Women are the strongest, but above all things, truth beareth away the victory." Each contestant brilliantly argued their respective propositions before the king, sitting in the royal seat of judgment, and attended by the princes of Persia and Media and all the officers of state. Zerubbabel was the last to speak, and in arguing his case, he displayed almost incredible courage, for he dared to make some personal allusions to the king's weakness where a woman was concerned. The king and princes showed signs of uneasiness, and without doubt their wrath would have descended in some terrible form upon the presumptuous young man, if he had not instantly switched off to a splendid conclusion and peroration about truth. The great climax of his oration swept the whole assembly off their feet, and all the people shouted, "Great is the truth, and mighty above all things." The fortune of Zerubbabel was made, and among other privileges, he was able to call the king his cousin. It is interesting to note, in passing, that notion survives to this day, seeing that a man on whom the king has conferred a title of nobility is addressed by His Majesty in the Patent Office as his trusty and well-beloved cousin. But the greatest privilege was the granting of his request to be allowed to complete the work of rebuilding the temple and holy city. Some say this story is a fable, but even if it be so, it is as much a part of the history of the ancient people as are the stories about King Alfred and the burnt cakes and King Canute and the waves of the tide. And I now conclude by quoting the words used by Lord Ampthill in completing his chat. It is interesting to Freemasons that such championship of truth, one of the 3 grand principles on which our order is founded, should be attributed to one of our great originals. What food for thought there is as we look back across the vista of 24 centuries on this picture of a new starting point for ancient people on that eternal quest for truth, on which mankind has ever been engaged. For more Masonic podcasts, videos, music, texts and artwork, visit fromthequarries.com or subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter and Facebook accounts by searching From the Quarries.